Hey guys, it's Eric here. I've received several inquiries about disposable PPE, specifically disposable lab jackets and disposable gowns. I went ahead and reached out to a few business partners of mine that are in the OSHA side of things, and they directed me to a few resources that I'm going to review here with you.
All right, so in the Guidelines for Isolation Precautions, Preventing Transmissions of Infectious Agents in the Healthcare Setting, 2007, updated July 2019, we're going to go to Part 2, and we're going to specifically look at Section 2E2, Isolation Gowns. So here we are, we find ourselves on page 52, and I'm just going to go ahead and read this section to you. Isolation gowns. Isolation gowns are used as specified by standard and transmission-based precautions to protect the healthcare worker's arms and exposed body areas and prevent contamination of clothing with blood, body fluid, and other potentially infectious materials. The need for and type of isolation gown selected is based on the nature of the patient interaction, including the anticipated degree of contact with infectious material and potential for blood and body fluid penetration of the barrier. The wearing of isolation gowns and other protective apparel is mandated by the OSHA Bloodborne pathogen standard. Clinical and laboratory coats or jackets worn over personal clothing for comfort and/or purposes of identity are not considered PPE. When applying standard precautions, an isolation gown is worn only if contact with blood or body fluid is anticipated. However, when contact precautions are used to prevent transmission of an infectious agent that is not interrupted by standard precautions alone and that is associated with environmental contamination, donning of both gown and gloves upon room entry is indicated to address unintentional contact with contaminated environmental surfaces. The routine donning of isolation gowns upon entry into an intensive care unit or other high-risk area does not prevent or influence potential colonization or infection of patients in those areas. Isolation gowns are always worn in combination with gloves and other PPE when indicated. Gowns are usually the first piece of PPE to be donned. Full coverage of the arms and body front from neck to mid-thigh or below will ensure that clothing and exposed upper body areas are protected. Several gown sizes should be available in a healthcare facility to ensure appropriate coverage for staff members. Isolation gowns should be removed before leaving the patient care area to prevent possible contamination of the environment outside the patient's room. Isolation gowns should be removed in a manner that prevents contamination of clothing or skin. The outer contaminated side of gown is turned inward and rolled into a bundle and then discarded into a designated container for waste or linen to contain contamination. Protective clothing and equipment, gowns, lab coats, gloves, masks, protective eyewear, face shield should be worn to prevent contamination of street clothing and to protect the skin of DHCP from exposure to blood and body substances. OSHA Bloodborne pathogens standards require sleeves to be long enough to protect the forearms when the gown is worn as PPE. DHCP should change protective clothing when it becomes visibly soiled and as soon as feasible if penetrated by blood or other potentially infectious fluids. All protective clothing should be removed before leaving the work area.
To further summarize this video, disposable lab coats and gowns are perfectly fine in the dental setting, as long as it covers the entire front of the practitioner to mid-thigh and the entire arm's length of the practitioner. If you leave the clinical area for whatever reason to go back to your office or go to lunch, the disposable jacket stays in the clinical area. If it gets heavily soiled, you also need to dispose of it. And at the end of the day, it's done. You need to throw it away. If you have any further questions, please put them in the comments below. All these links we discussed in the video will also be listed in the description of this video. Have a good day.